where faith, inspiration, and storytelling come together to bring the Bible to life like never before. Our mission is to take you on a spiritual journey through the Bible's stories, from the creation in Genesis to the revelations of the end times. Welcome to Timeless Bible Journeys.
Welcome to Timeless Bible Journeys. Here, we dive deep into the stories of the Bible, stories filled with drama, transformation, and profound lessons that still resonate today. If you find meaning in these ancient yet timeless narratives, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your insights in the comments below. Tonight, we're exploring one of the most mysterious and transformative moments in biblical history, the night Jacob wrestled with God. It was a battle unlike any other, a moment that would change not just Jacob's name, but his entire destiny. But what happened next? Many people know about the dramatic struggle at the Jabbok River, where Jacob was left limping but victorious, renamed Israel, meaning one who struggles with God. But that was just the beginning. After this divine encounter, Jacob's life took a series of dramatic turns, some moments of triumph, others filled with heartbreak and loss. He faced a long-awaited reunion with his brother Esau, a tragedy involving his daughter Dinah and the loss of his beloved wife Rachel. He experienced betrayal at the hands of his own sons, and ultimately, a powerful story of redemption through Joseph. Jacob's journey after wrestling with God is a profound reflection of our own lives, struggles, redemption, transformation, and faith. His story asks us a simple yet powerful question. What do we do after encountering God? Do we remain the same, or do we walk forward forever changed? Stay with us as we uncover the rest of Jacob's journey, a journey that shaped an entire nation and still speaks to us today. A moment of transformation, wrestling with the divine. Imagine standing alone under a vast, starry sky. The air is thick with tension, your heart pounding with uncertainty. You are on the brink of facing your past, an unresolved conflict that has haunted you for years. You feel the weight of your mistakes, the fear of what's to come. This was Jacob's reality on the night he found himself at the banks of the Jabbok River. He was not just crossing a physical boundary, but a spiritual one. He had spent years running from his past, from his mistakes, from the consequences of his actions, and now the moment of reckoning had arrived. Jacob had left his homeland after deceiving his brother Esau, stealing his birthright and their father's blessing. Now, 2 decades later, he was returning. But Esau was coming to meet him, accompanied by 400 men. Jacob feared the worst. Would his brother seek revenge? Would this be the end of his journey? Desperate, Jacob divided his family and possessions, sending them ahead in hopes of minimizing loss if Esau attacked. And then, for the first time in a long time, Jacob was alone. That night, something extraordinary happened. A man, mysterious, powerful, appeared and began to wrestle with Jacob. It was no ordinary fight. It lasted the entire night, an intense struggle between two forces, neither one relenting. But who was this stranger? Some believe it was an angel. Others believe it was God himself appearing in human form. Jacob, the deceiver, the trickster, the man who had spent his life trying to control his own fate, was now locked in a battle he could not win through cunning or manipulation. He had wrestled with people before, his brother, his father, his uncle Laban, but this was different. This was a spiritual battle. It was a test of endurance, faith, and surrender. As the dawn approached, the being touched Jacob's hip, dislocating it instantly. With just a touch, his strength was gone, his body weakened. But even in pain, Jacob refused to let go. Clinging to the stranger, he gasped, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked, "What is your name?" It was a simple question, but in biblical times, a name was more than just a label. It represented identity, character, destiny. By stating his name, Jacob was admitting who he was. Jacob, the deceiver, the supplanter, the one who had always tried to control his own fate. But then something incredible happened. The stranger replied, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Jacob was no longer just a man running from his past. He had been given a new identity. Israel, meaning one who struggles with God. His old self had been left behind, and a new path lay ahead. As the sun began to rise, the divine figure disappeared. Jacob stood there, exhausted, his body aching, his hip forever injured. But he had been changed. He had seen God face to face, and he had lived. It was a mark of his encounter, a reminder that transformation comes at a cost. He could no longer rely on his own strength, his own wit, his own schemes. From that moment on, he would walk differently, both physically and spiritually. This moment at the Jabbok River was a turning point, not just for Jacob, but for the entire future of Israel. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would lead him through trials, losses, and victories, but always under the guidance of the God who had renamed him. Jacob's story speaks to all of us. We all wrestle with something: doubt, fear, regret, our past mistakes. Sometimes we resist change. We fight against God's will, unwilling to surrender control. But transformation often comes through struggle. It is in the wrestling, in the breaking, that we truly encounter God. Jacob walked away from that night changed forever. But what about us? When we face our own Jabbok River moments, when we wrestle with life, with God, with our own identity, do we hold on until we receive our blessing? Do we walk forward, changed, even if it means carrying the limp of our past battles? Jacob's journey had only just begun, but now he was no longer walking alone. The fearful reunion, Jacob and Esau. The sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the land. Jacob stood at the banks of the Jabbok River, his body aching, his hip wounded, yet his spirit changed. He was no longer Jacob the deceiver. He was Israel, the one who had struggled with God and prevailed. But there was no time to dwell on his transformation. He had a far greater challenge ahead. His brother Esau was coming, and he was not alone. Jacob's past loomed before him like a shadow he could no longer outrun. More than 20 years had passed since he had last seen Esau, the brother he had tricked, deceived, and ultimately betrayed. The brother from whom he had stolen a birthright and a blessing. The brother who, the last time they had spoken, had vowed to kill him. And now Esau was approaching with 400 men. Jacob's mind raced. Was this an army coming to take revenge? Would his family be slaughtered? Would this be the final consequence of his past sins? He had wrestled with God and survived, but would he now fall at the hands of his own brother? Desperate, Jacob devised a strategy. He divided his people into groups, reasoning that if Esau attacked, at least some of them might escape. Then he sent ahead a series of gifts: herds of goats, sheep, camels, cattle, and donkeys, each delivered by a servant, each with the same message. "These gifts are from your servant Jacob, a gift to my lord Esau. He is coming behind us." Jacob hoped to soften Esau's heart, to turn his anger into mercy. But deep inside, fear gnawed at him. Gifts might appease Esau, but would they erase the wounds of betrayal? Then the moment arrived. Jacob lifted his eyes, and there he was. Esau, the brother he had wronged, the brother he had fled from, the brother who had every reason to hate him. Jacob's heart pounded. Swallowing his fear, he stepped forward. Then, in an act of humility, he bowed to the ground, not once but 7 times as he approached his brother. And then, something unexpected happened. Esau ran to Jacob, not with a sword, not with anger, not with vengeance in his eyes, but with open arms. He embraced Jacob, held him close, and wept. For a moment, time stood still. 2 brothers, once divided by deception and resentment, were now reunited in an overwhelming display of grace and forgiveness. Jacob, overwhelmed by Esau's kindness, introduced his family. His wives and children stepped forward, bowing before Esau in respect. And yet Esau did not come with demands. He did not seek repayment for what had been stolen from him. Instead, he said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have." Jacob, however, insisted. He had spent his life taking, grasping at blessings, manipulating his way to power. But now, he wanted to give. And in one of the most profound moments of the encounter, Jacob said to Esau, "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably." For years, Jacob had feared this meeting. He had expected wrath, punishment, retribution, but instead, he found grace. It was a divine lesson, one that echoed the transformation he had just undergone. He had wrestled with God and been given mercy, and now he had wrestled with his past and received the same. Esau offered to travel with Jacob, even to provide protection. But Jacob, cautious and weary, declined, citing the need to move at a slower pace because of his family and flocks. Instead of following Esau to Seir, Jacob took a different path. He journeyed to Sukkoth and later settled in Shechem. Though they did not walk the same road, the bitterness that had once defined their relationship was no longer there. The rift that had separated them for decades had been bridged, not by gifts, not by strategy, but by something far more powerful: forgiveness. This story of Jacob and Esau is more than just an ancient family drama. It is a reflection of our own struggles with reconciliation. How often do we avoid confronting those we have wronged? How often do we assume that our past mistakes will always define our relationships? But here's the truth. Reconciliation is possible. Forgiveness is possible. Jacob expected wrath, but found grace. And in doing so, he saw the face of God. Not in a dream, not in a divine wrestling match, but in the eyes of the brother he once betrayed. Perhaps that is one of the greatest lessons of Jacob's story, that in seeking forgiveness, in humbling ourselves before those we have wronged, we can see glimpses of God's mercy reflected in the people around us. Jacob had a new name, but this encounter gave him something just as important: a new heart. And so, with his past finally confronted, his brother's embrace still fresh in his memory, Jacob continued his journey, a journey that was far from over. The tragedy of Shechem, a family in crisis. Jacob had survived his greatest fear: his reunion with Esau. Against all odds, the brother he had deceived welcomed him with open arms. The weight of guilt and anxiety had lifted, and for the first time in decades, Jacob could breathe freely. But peace would not last long. After parting ways with Esau, Jacob journeyed to a place called Shechem in the land of Canaan. He purchased a plot of land and settled there, perhaps believing he had finally found a place to rest after years of wandering. But Shechem would not become a home of peace. Instead, it would become the setting of one of the darkest and most disturbing chapters in his family's story. At the center of this tragedy was Jacob's daughter, Dinah. Dinah, like any young woman, was curious about the world around her. One day, she went out to visit the women of the land, to explore, to meet new people, to experience life outside her family's camp. But tragedy struck. Shechem, the son of Hamor, the prince of the city, saw Dinah and was immediately drawn to her. But instead of approaching her with honor, he took her by force. He violated her, stripping her of her dignity and her innocence. But what made this even more complex was what followed. Unlike a typical act of cruelty, Shechem claimed to love Dinah. He wanted to marry her. He spoke tenderly to her, and he pleaded with his father, Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl as my wife." When Jacob heard what had happened, he was devastated. But strangely, he remained silent. Perhaps he was unsure how to respond, or perhaps he feared making an enemy of Shechem's people. Either way, he waited until his sons returned from the fields before taking action. But Jacob's sons were not willing to stay silent. When Simeon and Levi, two of Dinah's brothers, heard what had happened, their hearts burned with fury. To them, Shechem had committed an unforgivable crime, not just against their sister, but against their entire family. Their blood boiled with the need for justice, for vengeance. Then Hamor came to negotiate. He offered an alliance between their families, proposing intermarriage and shared prosperity. Shechem himself spoke up, saying he would convince the men of the city to undergo circumcision, promising them that such a deal would bring great wealth. But 3 days later, while the men of Shechem were still in pain and unable to defend themselves, Simeon and Levi struck. They took their swords and slaughtered every male in the city, including Shechem and his father Hamor. They rescued Dinah from Shechem's house and looted everything, livestock, possessions, even taking the women and children as captives. When Jacob learned what his sons had done, he was horrified. Instead of feeling vindicated, he saw the larger consequences. He rebuked Simeon and Levi, saying, "You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the people of this land. If they join forces against us, we will be destroyed." But Simeon and Levi stood by their actions, responding with a chilling question: should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? This moment revealed something unsettling. Jacob's sons had inherited his capacity for deception and calculated action, but with far greater violence and ruthlessness. Jacob had once deceived his own brother for a blessing. Now his sons had deceived an entire city in the name of vengeance. This event marked a turning point. It exposed the growing moral fractures within Jacob's family. They were not merely a clan moving toward prosperity. They were deeply flawed, carrying wounds, anger, and unhealed traumas. Even though they had avenged Dinah, had justice truly been served? Or had Simeon and Levi merely traded one crime for another? The tragedy of Shechem is a sobering reminder of how unchecked anger and vengeance can lead to devastation. The desire for justice, when mixed with rage, can quickly spiral into brutality and destruction. Jacob and his family would not remain in Shechem for long. Fearful of retaliation from surrounding tribes, Jacob knew they had to leave. But before they could move forward, they would first have to cleanse themselves and renew their commitment to God. Jacob's story was far from over. But from this moment on, the consequences of his family's actions would ripple through generations to come. Return to Bethel, a call to purity. The massacre at Shechem left Jacob in a precarious situation. His sons, driven by vengeance, had deceived and slaughtered an entire city. The land reeked with the stench of blood, and the surrounding nations would soon hear of what had happened. Jacob feared the worst. "You have brought trouble on me," he rebuked Simeon and Levi. "If the people of this land unite against us, we will be destroyed." For years, Jacob had been a man on the run, escaping Esau, fleeing Laban, wrestling with God, and now fearing retaliation. He had hoped Shechem would be a place of peace, a place to settle, but instead it had become a place of shame and danger. He knew he had to leave. And then, in the midst of this turmoil, God spoke. "Go up to Bethel and settle there, and build an altar to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." Jacob recognized the significance of this command. Bethel was not just another location, it was sacred ground. It was the place where, decades earlier, as a young man fleeing for his life, he had dreamed of a ladder reaching to heaven. It was where God had promised him descendants, protection, and a future. But something had changed since that first encounter. Jacob was no longer alone. He now had a large family, many possessions, and a new name, Israel. But despite the blessings God had given him, there was something within his household that needed to be addressed. Before returning to Bethel, Jacob knew there was work to be done. His family had become entangled with foreign customs, and idolatry had crept into their camp. Among their belongings were pagan idols, likely taken from Shechem during the plunder. These symbols of foreign gods had no place among a people set apart by the one true God. So Jacob issued a command, a call to purity and renewal. Get rid of the foreign gods you have with you, purify yourselves, and change your clothes. Then come, let us go to Bethel, where I will build an altar to the God who has been with me wherever I have gone. His household obeyed. They gathered their idols, their charms, and all their foreign gods, and Jacob took them and buried them under the great oak tree near Shechem. It was a symbolic act, burying the past, removing distractions, and turning their hearts fully toward God. Then they began their journey. Despite Jacob's fear of being attacked, something remarkable happened. The terror of God fell upon the surrounding cities, and no one dared pursue them. The family that had been vulnerable after the Shechem massacre was now shielded by divine protection. God was leading them to Bethel, just as he had promised. When they arrived, Jacob built an altar, just as God commanded. He named the place El Bethel, meaning God of Bethel, because it was there that God had revealed himself to him years before. It was a powerful moment, not just for Jacob, but for his entire household. In returning to Bethel, they were not just traveling to a physical location, they were returning to their spiritual foundation. They were renewing their commitment to God. But amid this renewal, sorrow struck. While they were still in the region, Deborah, the nurse of Jacob's mother, Rebekah, passed away. She had likely been with the family for many years, a link to Jacob's past, and her death was a reminder that time was passing, that the old was fading, and that change was inevitable. Then, at Bethel, something extraordinary happened. God appeared to Jacob once more and reaffirmed his covenant. Your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. This was not new information. Jacob had already been given this name after wrestling with God at the Jabbok River. But now, it was being reaffirmed. This was a moment of divine confirmation, a reminder that his identity was no longer tied to deception, but to God's purpose. And then God restated the covenant promise. I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and increase in number. A nation and a community of nations will come from you, and kings will be among your descendants. The land I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I give to you and your descendants. It was the same promise given to his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac. Now it was being entrusted to him. Jacob had once been a man who ran from his past, a man who relied on cunning and manipulation. But now, at Bethel, he stood as Israel, the chosen one through whom God's promise would continue. This return to Bethel was more than just a physical journey. It was a spiritual reset. It was a call to purity, a call to cast off distractions, to remove idols, and to fully embrace God's covenant. And perhaps this is a call that resonates with us today. How often do we drift from our foundation? How often do we allow distractions, whether material things, unhealthy relationships, or misplaced priorities, to pull us away from our faith? Jacob's story reminds us that we all need to return to our Bethel, to strip away the things that do not align with God's will, and to reaffirm our commitment to Him. For Jacob, this moment marked a turning point, but his journey was far from over. Trials, losses, and unexpected turns still lay ahead. Yet one thing was certain. He was no longer walking alone. He was walking with the God who had been with him from the very beginning. Loss and sorrow, the deaths of Rachel and Isaac. Jacob had returned to Bethel, renewed his commitment to God, and reaffirmed his divine calling. He had left behind the idols and distractions of the past, embracing the identity that God had given him. Israel, the father of a great nation. But even in moments of spiritual renewal, life does not pause. And as Jacob continued his journey, he would soon face some of the deepest sorrows of his life. His path would now be marked not by struggle, but by loss. After leaving Bethel, Jacob and his family set out toward Ephrath, the ancient name for Bethlehem. It was supposed to be just another stop in their long journey, but fate had other plans. Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, was pregnant once again. She had already given him Joseph, the son he cherished above all others, and now she was about to bear another child. But this birth would not be an easy one. As they traveled, Rachel went into hard labor. The pain was intense, and it soon became clear that something was wrong. The midwife, seeing Rachel's distress, tried to comfort her. "Don't be afraid, for you have another son," she said. But Rachel was slipping away. With her last breath, she named her newborn Ben-Ani, meaning son of my sorrow. But Jacob, refusing to let his son bear such a painful legacy, renamed him Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand. And then Rachel was gone. The woman Jacob had worked 14 years to marry. The woman he had loved more than anyone. The woman for whom he had suffered deception and exile. She was taken from him too soon on the road, with no time for final words or prolonged goodbyes. Jacob buried Rachel there, on the way to Bethlehem. Unlike the grand family tomb of Machpelah, where his ancestors rested, Rachel's grave was marked only by a pillar of stones, a lonely monument to a love that had been cut short. And so Jacob moved forward, but his heart carried the weight of sorrow. As Jacob grieved Rachel, another loss awaited him. Word reached him that his father, Isaac, was nearing the end of his days. And so Jacob made the journey back to memory, where Isaac had lived for many years. It was a return not just to a place, but to a man Jacob had not seen in a long time. Isaac, now 180 years old, was fading. His eyesight had failed long ago, and his body was weak. But he had lived long enough to see both of his sons, Jacob and Esau's, survive their conflicts and become great leaders in their own right. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. Esau, the brother Jacob had deceived and feared, was also there. The two sons, once bitter rivals, now stood side by side at their father's bedside. They had once been separated by lies and betrayal, but now they were united in grief. Isaac breathed his last, and he was gathered to his people. And just as Ishmael and Isaac had once come together to bury Abraham, now Jacob and Esau laid their father to rest in the family tomb. The cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Sarah, and Rebekah had already been buried. It was the closing of a chapter. The patriarchs of the past had passed on, and now the future belonged to Jacob and his descendants. But the losses Jacob suffered left him forever changed, a life marked by sorrow and blessing. Jacob had spent his life in pursuit of blessings, love, security, and purpose. And though he had received them all, he had also endured deep sorrow. He had lost his mother, Rebekah, without ever getting to say goodbye. He had lost his beloved Rachel on the road to Bethlehem. He had lost the trust of his older sons, who were growing restless and rebellious. And now he had lost his father, Isaac, the last link to his childhood. The weight of these losses would linger with Jacob for the rest of his life. He would come to see himself as a man acquainted with sorrow, as one who had been blessed yet burdened. But life does not stop for grief. Jacob still had 12 sons, a growing household, and a divine promise to uphold. The family struggles were far from over. Soon, jealousy and betrayal would arise in his own household, setting into motion a series of events that would change the course of history. But for now, Jacob walked forward, limping from his divine encounter, carrying the wounds of love and loss, yet still holding on to the God who had been with him from the beginning. Because even in sorrow, the promise remained. A father's heartbreak, the betrayal of Joseph. Jacob had faced many struggles in his life: deception, exile, divine encounters, and profound loss. But nothing could have prepared him for the heartbreak that was yet to come. It wasn't a tragedy of war, famine, or divine punishment. It was something far more personal. It was betrayal. Not by enemies, not by strangers, but by his own sons. Among Jacob's 12 sons, there was one whom he loved above all the others: Joseph, the firstborn of Rachel. Joseph was special not just because he was the child of Jacob's beloved wife, but because he carried a sense of destiny. He was intelligent, handsome, and had an unusual ability. He could interpret dreams. Jacob, in his deep love for Joseph, did something that would sow division within his family. He openly favored him. As a sign of his special love, Jacob gifted Joseph a coat of many colors, a magnificent robe, a symbol of status and importance. It was more than just a garment, it was an announcement. Joseph was the chosen one, the future leader of the family. His brothers noticed, and they hated him for it. Joseph, full of youthful confidence, began sharing his dreams with his brothers. "Listen to this dream I had," he told them one day. "We were binding sheaves of grain in the field, and suddenly my sheaf stood upright, while yours bowed down to mine." His brothers glared at him. "Do you think you will rule over us?" they asked, their resentment growing. Then Joseph had another dream. "The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Even Jacob, who adored Joseph, found this dream troubling. "Will your mother and I, along with your brothers, actually bow down to you?" he asked. But something in Jacob's heart stirred. Unlike his other sons who were consumed with jealousy, Jacob kept Joseph's dreams in mind. Perhaps, deep down, Jacob knew there was something different about this boy. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were tending the flocks in Dothan. When they saw him approaching, their hatred boiled over. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them sneered. Then, another voice spoke words that would change the course of history. "Let's kill him." The plan was simple: kill Joseph, throw his body into a pit, then tell their father that a wild animal had devoured him. It would be easy. No more dreams, no more favoritism, no more Joseph. But Reuben, the eldest, hesitated. "Let's not shed blood," he said. "Throw him into this pit instead." Reuben had a secret plan. He would return later and rescue Joseph. But before he could do so, something unexpected happened. A caravan of Ishmaelite traders was passing by, heading to Egypt. Seeing an opportunity, Judah spoke up. "Why kill him when we can sell him? He's our brother, after all." So they pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. Joseph, bound and helpless, was taken away to Egypt. The deception that broke Jacob's heart. Now the brothers had to cover their crime. They took Joseph's coat of many colors, tore it, and dipped it in goat's blood. Then they returned home, carrying the bloody robe. When Jacob saw it, his heart shattered. "It is my son's robe," he cried. "A wild beast has torn him apart. Joseph is surely dead." Grief consumed him. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for days. His sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but Jacob refused. "I will go to my grave mourning for my son," he wept. For Jacob, the pain was unbearable. He had already lost Rachel, and now Joseph, the son who reminded him of her, the son who carried his dreams, was gone. What he didn't know was that Joseph was not dead. He was alive. And God had a plan, a heartbreak that would lead to redemption. Jacob's sorrow was deep, but his story was not over. The son he thought he had lost would one day become the salvation of their entire family. But for now, Jacob remained in darkness, grieving for a son he believed he would never see again. The betrayal of Joseph was a wound that ran deep, a wound that would take years to heal. Lessons from Jacob's journey. Jacob's life was a journey filled with struggle, transformation, and redemption. From the moment he wrestled with God, his path was marked by encounters that shaped not only his destiny, but the future of an entire nation. His story teaches us powerful lessons that still resonate today. Transformation comes through struggle. Jacob's wrestling match with God was more than a physical fight. It was a battle for his identity. We too wrestle with challenges in life, doubts, failures, regrets. But true growth often comes from those very struggles. Forgiveness heals generations. Jacob feared Esau's wrath, yet their reunion was a lesson in grace. No matter how broken a relationship is, forgiveness is possible. Healing begins when we let go of past wounds. Unchecked. Anger leads to destruction. Simeon Levi's vengeance in Shechem teaches us how revenge can spiral into ruin. Justice must be guided by wisdom, not blind rage. Returning to God brings renewal. At Bethel, Jacob called his family to purity and devotion, reminding us that no matter how far we've strayed, we can always return to God. Loss is part of life's journey. Jacob endured grief and sorrow, yet he kept moving forward. His story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, God is still at work. God's plans are greater than our pain. Jacob mourned Joseph, thinking his story had ended. But God was preparing something far greater. When life seems hopeless, trust that the story isn't over yet. Jacob's journey is ultimately our journey, one of faith, struggle, and transformation. And so we ask ourselves, what is God shaping in our own lives today? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the story of Jacob, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Timeless Bible Journeys for more biblical narratives that inspire and transform. Until next time, may you walk in faith, seek truth, and embrace the journey ahead.